I just wanted to comment about the integration of music and images. And of course, there's a medium that does that routinely, which is film and cinema. And specifically with respect to representations of the Vietnam War, the films Good Morning Vietnam and Apocalypse Now come to mind, where toward the close of Apocalypse Now, you actually have virtually balletic sounding music, while all types of horrific events are taking place on the screen. So, I mean, I don't think that there's anything unusual about blending images with music. And I thought it was perfectly suitable to choose the Rolling Stones music for precisely the reason you gave, Bill, that this was something that the soldiers themselves were listening to. But I was a little bit curious about this notion of private memory. And I'm wondering if maybe the stronger or more useful concept might be social memory, since these memories seem to be shared. I mean, they can't be shared in the sense that every individual has their own unique experience, but there is a connection that people express, and I think was reflected in Dan's observation about returning vets going to the music session because they had heard the same music, and so there was some shared memory. So maybe it's more a social memory rather than a private one.
Yes, I mean certainly it's social. It's social in a very different circle. So if we're thinking about the networks, the memories that soldiers have, they share with other veterans. To some extent, they may share with friends and family. Sometimes some vets don't want to talk about their war experiences at all. But the networks are very different than, I think, public memory, I mean, basically in mass media. And that very often the images that are created in mass media are quite divergent from what participants, especially soldiers, may remember. And so when I meant private, I meant in the private sphere. In that they share with friends and family, which I think is quite distinct from the memory that the images and recollections that you have in the mass media.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm going to say something. I think that those are much more blended. I would argue that it's hard to pinpoint memories that are in certain circles that have not been infiltrated in some way by some larger circle, and particularly given the technological capacity to store and recycle, I think it's very hard to distinguish where private memory and public memory begin and end.
We'll leave it.
My question is along the same lines in a sense, and then I was thinking about the role that TV played when I was growing up in the 70s, and I've been, went to a friend's house and they had the entire Brady Bunch series, and I knew all, we all watched the same shows, and in a sense it was sort of a way that you accessed a shared culture, even if across potentially class and ethnicity and other kinds of lines. I mean, maybe not everyone was watching the same thing, but there were fewer things that people were watching on TV, and it wasn't like you had 200 channels. And now I think about the fact that given TiVo, given all these other kind of channels, there's certainly people aren't necessarily collectively watching the same kind of thing. And even the concept of sort of the water cooler conversation after a Seinfeld show or some show, I don't think people are necessarily in sync in the way with mass media in the way they might have been. And I'm just wondering to what extent that's true, but also what might be the implications. I mean, it's a rather superficial collective identity, but it is, or sort of connection. But are there implications for sort of a sense of community or any kind of shared or any kind of commonalities when the mass media are so personalized in people's experiences now?
Well, I think what we know, you're absolutely right. We don't have that kind of shared mass market anymore. What we have are niche-driven markets. And so what we have are people attending to messages that tend to be more consonant with people like them. Okay, so you're right. We don't have that shared landscape other than in situations of crisis. And we know that in situations of crisis, all of the niche-driven programming kind of gives way to the large-scale responsiveness to war or terror or natural disaster, whatever might be. Superficial, I don't know that that's an evaluative term I would use. Yeah, I think that certainly there are different attributes to a commonality that is built through mediated forms, and through mediated forms that aren't necessarily shared. But I guess I would argue that I'm glad I have the choice to see something like in entertainment, Mad Men today, where all I had way back when was I Love Lucy. So, you know, I think that one could argue that the mediated fare has gotten slightly more intelligent as well, which would certainly facilitate a different kind of commonality around it.
Yeah, I think the networks around media are very different. I think one of the points for me that's important is that the media themselves are not a reliable source of information about how people are using the media. That the meanings they're taking from the media, the meanings that they're creating, the meanings that they're negotiating with each other, are not known by looking only at the content of the media, and that's why I think the distinction between public and private experience is very important. You know, as a sociologist, I think it's very important to go beyond just the content of even niche media to find out how people are actually experiencing, partly in terms of the technologies they're using, partly in terms of the discussions they're having around the media.
So I want to pick up on that and ask you to look into the future some. You both brought up technology in different ways. Barbie, you asked about what is technology determined and what is determined otherwise. I was struck, Bill, when you said that genre is irrelevant to Pandora. You can ask for music like this, and then later talked about giving people control, the soldiers control when they had the cassette recorders. Of course, Pandora undoubtedly uses genre among a bunch of other features of music when it's choosing for you what like this means. Just like when you ask for images like this, someone's figured out the characteristics. Implicitly, it seems Google has figured out what news you want to hear, and it finds you news like this. So as we go forward in some funny way, there is more democracy in that you can find it anywhere. They're not the kinds of filters that you were talking about, Barbie, on photographs. But some algorithm, probably almost exactly the same algorithm, is finding, I mean, that's what we computer scientists, you know, love, right? The same algorithm will find you music like this and photographs like this and news like this and novels like this and films like this, right? That's just running there. If there's any choosing of characteristics, that's being done by somebody to start it off. And then there's machine learning that's learning about you and about what like this is. What does all that mean going forward for these different planes of selectivity? And, you know, where do we go?
It reminds me of my lament when I first came to a library that was closed stack. And I thought, wow, is anybody paying attention to what I just lost? And I want to respond to you by saying nobody has figured out how to search for images. And this is to all of you out there, whoever might have some looking for some additional research agenda. Nobody has figured out how to put in an image, put in search parameters for an image and find the exact image, okay? And that's kind of the corollary. In other words, if I'm looking for a particular image that I know appeared, I can't tell the search machine to go find it and it will find it. It will find a field for me. And so that, I think that there's a corollary there. I mean, I want to be hopeful. I want to say that old and new both do different things. And I want to say that, you know, I think that it's incumbent upon us to figure out search mechanisms that bump up against Google, and the kind of algorithms that are telling us where they think we need to go. So if we have 10 pages on an image, go to the 10th page before you go to the first.
Yeah, when I think of genres, the sort of classical image of the genre is the old record store, where they had bins and every record had to be put in one sort of bin and only one sort of bin. So you had categories that were exclusive and exhaustive. Pandora, as I understand the way Pandora works, is that they've coded thousands and thousands of songs, and they've coded them on the basis of traits. So the instrumentation, the era of the composer, the tempo, things like that. As far as I know, they don't ever use genre as one of the ways that they categorize music. So that, you know, they won't say techno or something, but certain rhythms and certain instrumentation and so forth that techno things might share would lead them to be put in common. When you create your own radio station, you can put in like Bach, and you get a lot of music that was written in that period that has the certain instrumentation and so forth. I don't know if they ever have a code for Baroque. I think it's just other pieces that have the same features, the same sonic features as the one that you put in, or the same, you know, period sort of features. Whereas on iTunes, you go on and they have on the side, you know, all the different genres. Amazon is somewhere in between. They're not coding the sound itself. They're just showing you people that bought what you just bought also bought. So it's purely in terms of a network kind of thing. And as far as I know, that they don't take genre into account. So I think it's an empirical question. And, you know, it's interesting to see the different ways that genre is being preserved or ignored now.